I was trying to think of ways to do this. I couldn't quite decide on any. I don't think there's a perfect way to illustrate a mind like Bonaventure's. This is kind of my cheap, crude way of. I'm going to have a few slides here just to attempt to illustrate what I am trying to express in words. And one of the key thematic things with Bonaventure is he's a highly organized, structured thinker. And if you're trying to like plot out his line of thought, you have to keep certain things in mind. And I feel like where some people there is a long-standing criticism of the scholastic tradition that it's dry and that it's void of any soul. I don't think that's necessarily a fair assessment of what the scholastics were doing. It's just that they had a very rigorous methodology to try to help explain certain contradictions or areas where it seemed like there might be certain incompatibilities with various texts, be it out from scripture or from the early church fathers. And one of the ways in which Bonaventure will work through these arguments systematically is he will start with, like, let's say a general theme of what he's going to be covering, and then let's just say if there's a unifying circle that I didn't include here, like a one circle at the top. I kind of ran out of space here, but and from that branching down, you'll get, like, let's just, this is just kind of an illustration here. This is not anything specific, but three other circular points that he might make. And then from there, he's going to draw three from those, and then a further three from those. So you kind of get these circles that are going to work their way down into these various branches. And then you'll also know it's purposeful to have the circles with the arrows here, because there's a circularity to the way that Bonaventure makes his points. He will kind of draw down, and he'll draw you down into the subject, and as he's branching out, he's also moving with a directional end in mind, where he's going to draw down into these subjects and then kind of pull them all back up to recirculate them, to recapitulate them, right? Or capitulation in terms of reheading, bringing it back up to the source. And one just another way to try to illustrate this too is, if you could imagine, he's doing this in multiple different ways at different times. So he's got all of these little like breakdowns and circular things that he's doing where he's drawing you down, but then there's this overarching circularity to the way that he will, if there's a wider context to the subject that he's speaking about, he might be breaking it down into these multiple ways, but you have to keep in mind that there's an overarching recirculation that's taking place. And just another way to kind of illustrate that may be, and this is all for my visual learners out there, right? I'm a visual learner myself, so it kind of helps me to keep these things in mind when we're talking about how somebody like Bonaventure writes. But if you want to think about it, right, like you have this wider circle that's taking place, but within that wider circle, you have these little branches where he will recirculate points, and within those points, he will also recirculate points to the nth degree that he has to take a subject. He will keep these little smaller circles going and going, but then they return back to the source, and then that circle will return back to its source until you got this greater circularity that's taking place. Now, to sort of further elaborate here, and again, this is just my own crude interpretation. There might be even better ways of illustrating this, but not only is there a breaking down, so like you begin with the source of one, and then let's just say that one breaks down to circles 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and then those 2.3 breaks down to ABC, 2.2 ABC, 2.3 ABC. There's the hierarchical structure like that, where you've got the hierarch, the top of the principal thing that he's trying to discuss, and then he'll sort of go down from the source down into all of the various areas. But then he's also, and I kind of illustrate this in my little crude example of rays, right? So he's going down from the source, but he's also like the ultimate object of what Bonaventure is trying to do, no matter where his starting point is he wants to retrace everything back up to the source. And that's where we get this recircularity, this recapitulation that takes place in his writings. And I'm kind of, and this is kind of a like a neat, like I'm drawing it as if these like there's these clear demarcations between, 2.1a and then 2.2 a b c c, where they don't overlap. But the reality is that when Bonaventure is doing this, don't necessarily think of it as clean and perfect like that, because so many of these subjects, it's more like a matrix, right? They interlace, they interlock, and you know 2.1a, or let's just say 2.1 might have its own ABC, but that 2.1 also has some crossover into 2.2 ABC or 2.3 ABC. There's not like these like clear things, and Bonaventure will bring certain points that he's made, let's say previously in an argument, and draw reference back to that later on in the argument. So you kind of have to keep your mind, let's just say, keep track of these things and how they relate to one another. Now, the thing I don't like about an image like a matrix is it's a little bit too chaotic for somebody like the way that Bonaventure writes. And there is a really great ordering to the way that Bonaventure thinks and writes, and probably the best illustration that one can give of this is to think of like a cathedral. And I've heard from several different places that Bonaventure, in fact, did think in terms of these like structural analogies in the mind, where he's building up from the ground all the way to the top, to the source and the summit of all of these things. And you really do get the sense when you're reading Bonaventure that you're in the presence of a master. And the way that Bonaventure writes theology is analogous to the way that a master builds a cathedral, a master mason, or the way that a master artist paints the Sistine Chapels. Like you are Bonaventure puts words to paper in the same in this in with the same beauty and brilliance and elegance that you would see at one of these great cathedrals of medieval Europe. And there's no real, I personally, now this is me giving my personal opinion, I don't think there's anything necessarily comparable to the way that Bonaventure, you can disagree with certain things, but in terms of the dryness and the aridity of the styles comes with the reputation of the scholastics, I don't think it's actually fair. And I think when you know what's going on and you start connecting all of these pieces and you start putting together in your mind the picture, the theological picture that Bonaventure, or the structure that he's creating, it's massively ordered, and ordered in such a way that when it's placed and put together, you're left with just this awe-inspiring structure. So this is my kind of coming to know Bonaventure. And some other things that we need to know are just sort of some key concepts of the way that Bonaventure thinks, terms that he's going to use. Now, this is a long subject in and of itself, and there's only really just a few here that I want to like draw attention to as we're going through this work, just to make sure that we're not equivocating here, that we're using univocal language and we're meaning what Bonaventure means when we say these things. And I have, for all of your entertainment needs, I have put together a few little fun illustrations in my, once again, crude and completely technologically illiterate way, but hopefully it'll help make sense of what I'm trying to say here. So a very, very important concept in Bonaventure and these texts is going to be the idea of illumination. Now, Bonaventure in his Augustinian methodology draws from Augustine here, and there's an epistemic quality to Bonaventure's use of the word illumination that we're going to dive into at greater length here. But it's also a metaphysical category that Bonaventure uses to help us explain the intelligibility of created things. So, what we mean by that is Bonaventure begins with what he will call the vestige. That is the vestigial artifacts of things that seem to point to something else. Because let's just say you begin with a an artifact, a vestige. I've got this little box here. Now, this little vestige box does not exist in such a way that it's void of any ability to come to know it, to for it to be in and of itself intelligible. And so Bonaventure says that there's a certain illumination to the vestiges that even before man and the or let's just say even before a rational creature walks up and experiences this vestige, it's already got a illumination taking place that allows it to be intelligible for the rational creature that's going to come into contact with it. And so of course we also have here the other vestige, which is going to come up to this other vestige, make contact with it, and there is an illumination within that vestige as it experiences and comes to sense and perceive this artifact. And that, Bonaventure says, is a unique type of vestige that is a subject that's endowed with memory, intellect, and wills, powers of memory, intellect, and will, which in turn makes this artifact that the rational creature with memory, intellect, and will is able to see that there is what Bonaventure will call the footprints of the creator have been here, right? Because these things are intelligible, and so with that memory, intellect, and will, you're able to see the footprints of the creator that had been here and left these vestiges are footprints of the creator. And through memory, intellect, and will, we're able to trace back. So because of these powers of memory, intellect, and will, and the ability to come to certain degrees of knowledge, this is what Bonaventure says makes us not just a vestige, we as in man, but it makes us an image. Related to this is there's also a strong sense of hierarchization, and perfect ordering is key not only to Bonaventure but honestly to the entire Franciscan order itself. This is one of the key themes, and this is one of those I really wish, as we kind of make our way back into recovering maybe some of our scholastic identity as Catholics, I would love to see a return to certain concepts that we, because of the conversations that took place with the reformers and then later with these skeptics and the later philosophical understandings, we kind of like dropped certain principles because of other people's rejections of things that we have like categorically helped to use to make sense of the world. And I don't think that was ever a necessary thing for us to drop these things. And hierarchization is one that I would love to see return back to at least. Okay, so if you're dealing with a philosophical skeptic, then maybe you're not going to talk about something like hierarchization. But Catholics among Catholics, we should be having these conversations. So while certain objects and categories maintain degrees of independence in their operation, right? So the vestige, there is a certain degree, I hate to use the word autonomy, but there's a certain degree of independence that a vestige doesn't necessarily in and of itself need the image to operate, but they will also build upon one another. So we can begin with the idea here of the vestige, right? And vestiges are just any created thing that is intelligible, right? So man is a vestige, dog is a vestige, any the box on the floor is a vestige, the things that we walk out to in the world, these things that have that light of intelligibility when we first come into contact with them, it's already there. Then we have the image, right? This is man with the powers of memory, intellect, and will, who's not just a vestige, but because of these powers is lifted up to the identity of an image. Now then with Bonaventure, one can only ascend from this ladder by the operation of grace acting on the person. And so when grace acts on the person is actually able to not just become a image, but as well the person can become a likeness, or what Bonaventure will refer to as a similitude, which is the likeness of the person becoming more divine like, more godlike. And all of this is a movement of not a different, with Bonaventure it's a totally different subject, but with Bonaventure the movement through from vestige to image to similitude is a movement of operation. It's a movement from nature to supernature, is the mode of operating, of working for that specific place that the person is at, right? So from image to similitude, it's not that your nature has been destroyed and recreated, it's that the mode of operating has changed. So, when moving forward in this lecture, it is important to keep all of the previous slides in mind. I have tried my best to tie all of the threads together in a manner that is cohesive and accessible. At any given point, don't lose sight that one specific recirculation that we're going to be discussing here going forward is but a part of the greater structure that the seraphic doctor is building. Now, Bonaventure will stop short here in the De Reductione. He stops short of a greater theological treaty. We will end where he does with divine revelation, but remember that the sermon is itself a part of an even larger cathedral that he's throughout his lifetime, that gives the fullness of his thought when combined with his other works. And also, just as a little like point, bonus points for people that are able to, keep a lookout for the triadic structure of his thought. If you're not careful, you might miss it. And I'm actually kidding there. You're going to find that Bonaventure loves his triads. He works in groups of threes, like an artist that's just delighting in his work.